Hi, everybody. Welcome to Screen Less, Play More. I am Cynthia, the founder of ScreenLessPlayMore.com, and I'm very excited because I have one of my favorite people, Charlotte Winters, who is going to talk to us about the insane world of college prep and college test prep and SAT. And she has been in this world for a very long time. So I will let her introduce herself. Charlotte Winters.
Hi, my name is Charlotte Winters, and I live in Raleigh, North Carolina. And for about the last 14 to 15 years, I've been an SAT and ACT verbal tutor, and I've helped hundreds of kids. I've worked with them one-on-one to get the scores that they need to get into their dream colleges. I genuinely love this work because I love helping a teenager get from maybe a baseline score to their dream score. But really what I love to do is I love to help them become better readers and writers. And so that's kind of what's kept me super engaged in this work.
Wonderful. So I personally, in 1996, went to the library, took out an enormous, thick book, and went home and panicked about it and did some, pretend tests and showed up to the SAT. And it is not that world anymore. There are so many options and so many ways to prepare. And you have seen that world. And I'm guessing you've also seen that world change even just in the last probably 10 years, maybe even 5 years. And so we are going to talk this morning about how this world has just gotten pretty crazy, such that we've even got varsity blues type things happening a couple of years ago. And how you can just, if you just want to do some SAT prep and get your kids ready, but you don't want to get in this totally insane rat race, Charlotte has some really good suggestions for all of us on how to do this in a sane way and how to make sure your kids are ready, but that you don't have to go down the rabbit hole of really getting anxious about it. So let's start, though, by saying, where do we stand these days? Like, how crazy has it gotten?
Okay, so there are a few, you're absolutely right. So when I was in the 90s and I did the SAT, I got the books. I did have a tutor, or one for math and one for verbal. And of course we had the Princeton Review and we did have Kaplan. It seems as though when you and I were in undergrad, the SAT and potentially the ACT, they began to change their formats a little bit as they tend to do every 10 years. So in the aughts and in the teens, the SAT went from a 1600 to a 2400 scale. So it was a verbal section, it was a math section, it was a writing section. So it was kind of like now there was a longer test. The kids had more expected of them, especially like there was grammar introduced, which I don't think we had. Mm-hmm. We just had words and reading and, stuff. But I think it happened there, but it was also a general cultural shift where it was all of a sudden in the last 25 years, it became a must to get a bachelor's degree, right? Whereas, even to get, an entry-level job, which wasn't always the case. So it's like you have a combination of more people are applying to colleges. And then, of course, the SAT is, and the ACT. And by the way, the SAT and ACT fight over market share. And they've actually, in some ways, they've almost become, there's quite a lot of overlap among the tests. But it's sort of like you had this perfect storm where it's like more people are applying, but colleges can't let them in, right?
And I didn't even take the ACT. Does it seem like everybody takes both of them these days?
No, you don't have to take both.
You choose one or the other?
Yeah, you choose one or the other. The SAT has been around longer, It's almost a century old. The ACT has been around since the 1950s. And the ACT started in the South and the Midwest, but it's grown, but it's still, I think that the SAT is slightly more dominant, even though that the ACT has grown.
And I sort of feel like back in the day, there was like certain schools, if you were going to go to certain schools, you would want one over the other. Like, I sort of remember that if you were going to go to like a state school or an ag school, you wanted the ACT. Is that still true? Or like, what's the difference and why would you want to take one over the other?
Maybe back in the day, because again, the ACT was super popular in the South and the Midwest.
Okay.
But it's leveled out where at least in the 14 or 15 years that I've been doing it, I've never heard, I need to take the ACT because I need to go to this state school. It's basically if they accept one, they accept the other, and they don't have a preference.
Okay. So it's personal preference?
It is personal preference. Yeah.
Is
absolutely.
one harder than the other? They very
It
similar?
depends on, this is such a good question. It depends on the student. So now here's the thing. So I talked about the craziness of how it went up to 2,400. It just went back to 1,600 within about the last few years. And so and it's also now on the SAT, it's fully digital. So you can't take a paper and pen test.
Okay.
And another thing that has really gone into the factor is the push for equity. Because I think the SAT doesn't exactly have like the most PC of origins. It was actually designed to it's a test it was designed to keep people out of like the Ivy League. But then of course, these schools, they just started doing it because they just needed a litmus test of how well will you do in your first year. And so they've constantly reinvented it, and they've responded to the culture where, of course, they can't be like, well, we can't do that anymore, where it's like we can't have like this flagrantly, I don't even know the word, exclusionary kind of bias to keeping kids out. They made push for it to be more meritocratic, where it's just like, it's a very formulaic test. You study it and you use what you can study. Like, it's very democratized. It's not like secret information of what's going to be on the test, but they've come leaps and bounds from their origin stories in order to just make this where it is a litmus test of how well you are going to do your freshman year. But it's also just like you can study and you can do well on it if you apply yourself. And then back to your original question of how to tell if you can do if one is better suited than another. Now, the SAT, there are two major sections. There's a reading and writing. That's one section. There's a math section. It tends to be that if you have a kid they're more nuanced in their thinking, they're more multi-step in their thinking, it's better to do maybe the SAT. The ACT, it's kind of like it's not as nuanced. It's just they're going to ask you a question, you just find the answer. They ask you the question, find the answer. It's not like I got to think another step about this. That's one major difference. Another major difference is on the SAT, passages are way shorter. They're way shorter than ACT passages. So again, if your child isn't a reader, maybe the SAT, that might be better. The third thing that I want to bring up is the digital versus the hybrid format. So with the SAT, if your child does not like to if they don't do well on the screen, right? Working, they may want to take the ACT. And the ACT, of course, you can get it as a paper and pencil, and you have to go to a testing center. I've heard kids with ADHD and ADD, they tend to do better with the paper tests.
And that's only for the ACT?
That's only for the ACT. Now, if you have a child who does have a learning difference in both tests, you can apply for accommodations and they can get longer time.
Do you think for kids that are like, I have a 9-year-old and a 7-year-old, and, they take these standardized tests on a pretty regular basis, and they are all on the computer now. Do you think that is a good preparation for them to just understand how to take tests on a computer, or is it all a wash? Because part of me I've sort of thought like, ugh, I'm going to opt out of those. That just stresses them out, and it's standardized and it doesn't mean anything for their grades and whatever. But now to hear you talking, I'm thinking, oh, well, maybe I should just have them take those standardized tests because it gives them practice of just knowing what it's like to take a test on a computer.
Yeah, it's a personal choice. One thing I will say is that online learning, it's not going away. It's not, it's probably only going to be growing, as frightening as that is. I would say that, it's just good practice. It's just good practice. If they eventually want to take the SAT or, another standardized test, it's just kind of like, this is what it's like to take a standardized test on the computer. Not a big deal.
It's a good point. So everybody's got a choice. And what about the PSAT? That's given junior year?
Oh, good question. Did you know that the PSAT can actually start in 8th grade?
My goodness.
Okay. So the PSAT 11, it's kind of a dress rehearsal for the performance that is the SAT, right? But the thing is what's been happening is that people have started, or the College Board has released the PSAT 10, the PSAT 9, the PSAT 8. And it's all just kind of like, how are you doing in 8th grade? Are you ready? It becomes a little bit of an arms race where it's sort of like, oh, so I hear, a lot of people take the PSAT 10. So it's like a rehearsal for the dress rehearsal for the performance of the exam, which is going to predict how you do in college.
Wow.
Okay. So I just kind of want to put it out there. That's not uncommon. Do you have to take the PSAT 8, 9, or 10? No. Don't worry about it.
So that's the 8th grade, 9th grade, 10th grade.
Yes. The 11th grade is the big one, in the sense that most juniors take it in the fall of their junior year. And again, it predicts, it's a predictor of how you're going to do on the actual SAT. And mainly by that, it's like, how much do you need to study?
And is that usually your jumping off point when you enter kids' lives? Is their parents found out what they did on the PSAT and then they freaked out and were like, we need help?
Yes. Although I have talked to proactive parents who are just like, the PSAT is coming up and we want to prepare, which I think is great. It's great. And again, if you're taking the PSAT 8, 9, or 10, not a bad move. It's just sort of like, we just kind of want to see how the kid is trucking along. It's not something to get super, squeamish about, but it's sort of like, here's the thing. So let's say you were to take the PSAT 11 and you got a 900, right? Total out of
1,600.
Yeah. Now, suppose you really want to go to Harvard, where basically Ivy Leagues, it's like a 1,500 and above. That's what you need. What that means is you're going to really have to study.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it's telling you. Like, you're going to have to really, put the seat of the pants to the seat of the chair. That's what the purpose of the PSAT is. The second thing is that there's National Merit Scholarship. So that is a feather in your cap. It could potentially lead to scholarship money.
So if you did over a certain point on the PSAT, you are possibly going to, let's see what sort of, like the National Merit Scholarship only bases it on the PSAT?
Yeah, the PSAT 11.
And do you know what the point range is?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, obviously it's got to be high. The PSAT is on a scale, or the highest you can get is a 1520, whereas on the SAT it's a 1600.
Strange. So they have a different scale for the PSAT.
They have a different scale.
That's bizarre.
Yeah.
So it's not apples to apples.
It's not apples to apples.
That's really weird. Well, so because I saw online, so out of a 1,600, the World Wide Web says that the average is 1050.
Yeah.
And then it says if you get a 1350, you're in the top 10% of people taking it. But I did also see, Bill Gates got a 1590. I think it said that Mark Zuckerberg got a 1600. However, Bill Clinton got a 1030 and George W. Bush got a 1206.
Really?
So, I mean, it's all over the board. Like it's interesting that you say it's a predictor of how you're going to do, because there's so many factors that go into your freshman year. But what do you think it is that makes it a predictor of college success?
At first, I used to think that, well, we need to test the they want to have a way to test the population where, on a facet of human intelligence where everybody can learn and do good. Like, so for example, we're going to test everybody on reasoning, right? So it's verbal reasoning, it's quantitative reasoning, as opposed to creativity. It's another facet of human intelligence, but you can't test the population on that, right? So it's kind of like, I think what it is it is that, but I think what it also is it's the stuff behind that. So let's say you were to get a 900 and you want to get a 1600. Well, can you identify the areas that you need to improve in? Can you create an action plan and follow through on that, right? Can you build that intellectual muscle on both of those places where it's kind of like if you are in a freshman seminar and you're taking like 4 of them and maybe it's going over your head, are you the type of student to buckle down and do the work?
Well, that's interesting. So it's not necessarily that, it's an IQ type of thing and what you get is what you get and you're either smart enough to hang. It's more like, can you get your score up to the place that you want it to be? Because that really shows diligence and hard work and dedication.
That's how I would like to think about it. I could be wrong. Here's the interesting thing. So during the pandemic, some Ivy League and top schools, they had SAT optional. It used to be required. Now it was optional because, of course, we were in a worldwide pandemic. So, of course, what happened was all of the applications went up. And so they began letting some kids in to say MIT, right, where it was only based on grades, of course, not test scores. They checked in with the kids, like in their freshman year, they couldn't do the work.
Interesting.
Yeah, they couldn't.
When it was only based on grades.
When it was only based on grade, which is kind of another thing that what I think, but the College Board won't say out loud, is that really it's the thing about the SAT and the ACT is that it susses out grade inflation. Because they are going to see all of the scores from a particular school. The admissions officers, they're going to basically, what I've heard is, let's say we have 7 kids applying from Harvard Westlake, which is a very Tony school in LA. Like all the celebrities have their send their kids there. If all of the kids are getting A's, right? But now I know Harvard Westlake, they're very rigorous, but let's just say that they're all getting A's, but everybody's getting an 1100, right? Then that means that something's off with the grading.
That's interesting. That actually tells them a lot about the school then.
It tells them a lot about the school. But no, I know Harvard Westlake, that, believe me, Harvard Westlake is like, believe me, if they're getting an A, they're getting a 1600. It's a very rigorous school. So I didn't need to use that as like...
also, at, say a different school, if everybody's getting an A, then it doesn't tell you anything.
Right. It doesn't tell you anything. It does not tell you anything.
But so the admission to the SAT and you bomb it.
Yeah. Then it's sort of like, it's... that really says more about the school than anything. And yeah.
So you come in at, let's see here, you meet these parents who, let's see, are they usually coming to you 8th grade, 9th grade, post PSAT, and are a lot of them just totally panicked? Are they going crazy? Are they being level-headed about it?
Oh, usually in 11th grade.
Okay.
Usually, like the year that it happens, very rare 10th grade, but usually 11th grade.
And so they probably have a PSAT score and they've realized, oh no, I want to bring this up.
Yeah, or it's just it's usually not. The parents that I've worked with are pretty cool.
Okay.
Where it's kind of like, I know that the headlines, and also with our own cognitive biases, we can think like nobody's doing well, everybody's gonna, blah, blah, blah. But actually, most people that I've met are pretty level-headed, in the sense that it's usually, scores that like the before scores I see are in the 5 or the 600s, and maybe they want to get into the 600 or the 700.
So out of 1,600, they're getting a 500.
No, like on each, like I'm just talking about the verbal.
On each portion. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, because there's a math portion, there's an English portion, and each are 800.
Yes. So
Got
I just only do the verbal.
Okay, got it. So what, you had said something to me before we started recording, like, what's your thought when somebody comes to you and their kid is not doing amazing on the verbal? Like, what's your thought about how they're going to do, and what's usually your game plan?
Okay, so what I always do is I make sure that we start with a baseline score from a real SAT. So, of course, they can go on to Blue Book. They can take a practice test. It's free. And then I just see, okay, what is the score? What was the PSAT score, right? And so we have a baseline, because here's the thing. A lot of the stuff where they don't think that they did well, that is a very subjective thing. Like not doing well varies from parent to parent. Okay. So not doing well for one parent is a 560 on verbal. Not doing well for another parent is a 780. So what we do is we see what the scores are. And thankfully with the Blue Book app, or even with the SAT, even with the PSAT, you get a breakdown in the 4 content domains. I'm just talking, for both math and verbal, but for verbal. And so it's kind of like, it's craft and structure, information ideas, standard English conventions, and expression of ideas. So I can see if it's craft and structure, basically what that means is we need to work more on reading, right? Because that's what that is. If it's information and ideas, we need to work more on the interpretation of data, those questions. If it's standard English conventions, that's grammar. And for expression of ideas, it's transition words, and there's this rhetorical synthesis question. But basically, I just attack it very rationally, and we go to the target area first. Or if the kid really needs a lot of work, we're just going to do it in the order of the exam. So it's just like when they sit down, it's like it's always craft and structure, information, ideas, standard English conventions, expression of ideas. Those things are always in this. Those content domains are in the same, order. So it really can help some kids orient themselves. So it's just like we're just going to go through the exam, work on it, and question type by question type.
Now, I just remember thinking, okay, there's only so much you can know, but then there's quote unquote tricks to doing the SAT. How true do you think that is? Of like, you could be at a certain score. Like, do you think that they're improving their scores because they're learning the tricks of the test, or they're doing better on their actual fundamental ability to do math or reading or language?
Oh, that is such a good question. What I will say is that, yes, there are tips and tricks. For example, so in the information and ideas questions, one of the patterns that comes up in the answers is so they'll give you a graph, they'll give you a paragraph, and then they'll give you a question about the graph as it relates to the paragraph, right? And they'll give you some answers. The tricky thing is that there's a pattern that comes up where it's right answer, wrong question. So what that means is for maybe 2 or 3 of the answers, it's right. Okay? Like you can find the answer in the graph, but that's not what the question is asking for.
Interesting.
So what I found is that while there are tips and tricks, it really is a test of precision on the verbal side. So it's kind of like if you are using the tips and the tricks, it probably also means like you have to have that incredibly fine way of thinking, of discernment, in order to help you answer those questions.
And do you think that can be taught in the year before you take it?
I think it can be taught. But what I want to tell your parent or the people listening is the best way to prepare for the verbal side of the exam, even if the kids are not even in 8th grade, is are they readers? Are they readers? Are they picking up books on their own? Are they reading? Are they following along with the story? Are they asking questions about vocabulary? Are they showing an intellectual curiosity for that? Are they keeping up with the grade level benchmarks for their, the standardized test year over year? That is the best way that you can prepare. So you don't have to be like giving them a Princeton review book when they're 7, right?
Mm-hmm.
You just want to make sure, can they read a book and can they follow along? Can they, because it's developing the intellectual muscles up here.
Mm-hmm.
That is going to best serve them on the exam when they've actually been really practicing in the sense that they've been critical readers.
Mm-hmm. Which I would point out to that, which I love that because, again, I've got a 9-year-old and a 7-year-old, and we do a lot of reading at our house. And I think it has helped them so much. I mean, I've been reading to them since they were like 2 months old. And the thing I would point out is, are they reading books? Not are they reading Twitter feeds?
Right.
That like what you're saying is like critical thinking. Can you read a book, think about the plot, answer questions about the plot? It's not reading texts.
Right.
It's not reading quick little snippets here and there, because the skills are coming in when you're reading an actual book. And I would assume, would you say varied reading also, like fiction, nonfiction, magazines, newspapers?
Yep.
You just like
wide gamut. And again, it isn't the SAT, the verbal portion, it's only 54 minutes long, right? It's not a huge amount of time in somebody's life, right? So again, it's not just preparing for the SAT, but it's also preparing them for that first year of college. And or beyond that, are they being set up to be lifelong readers and to be critical? And now is the time, because their brain cells, are forming and that they are sponges. Because I will say that it might get a little bit more challenging when they're older. It's not impossible, but yeah, they should be reading a wide gamut. Don't be afraid to, expose them to news articles that are age appropriate.
Mm-hmm. Well, we got a good laugh because the last couple of days we've been listening to one of actually the very first Hardy Boys book.
Yeah.
And it's a hoot because it's, like G. Willikers and, but I will say it's vocabulary that we are not exposed to really anymore. Like they call each other chums instead of friends, or they were talking about, looking, of course it's a mystery, and they were talking about looking for stuff and just the different words they're using about like doing reconnaissance or I can't even think of the other word that I pointed out, where I had to actually pause and say, do you guys know what this means? And there were like at least 3 or 4 words in the first 10 minutes that I knew, but I certainly don't use them in my everyday life. And I've never exposed them to these words. And they were probably words that I learned reading because, no, a lot of people don't say these words anymore, but you may get them when you're reading a book. And it really sounded to me like it was from the 50s. And then I looked it up and it was actually written in 1927.
Really?
But one thing I would add that I read recently that made me super sad is that kids that are not reading books, they're just watching TikTok or playing Roblox. Some of these kids do not have the ability to picture in their minds what's going on. If you said to them, the bunny rabbit runs across the lawn and he was having so much fun playing with the squirrel, there's like no movie going on in their brains of the bunny and the squirrel. And when you start reading from a very young age and having stories read to you, you have this movie theater in your mind that you're able to conjure up. We all have these images. You read Harry Potter and you picture exactly what it's like, and it looks so different than the movie because you had your own movie going on in your mind. And that's part of what strengthens these neurons and strengthens these pathways in your brain, is like having to picture what the mansion looks like that the Hardy Boys are walking through as they're doing their mystery discoveries. And so it just made me so sad to think that some of these children don't have this ability to imagine things in their brain. And once you get to a certain age, I sort of feel like that gets cut off. Like your brain is set in stone at a certain age. And, I guess I shouldn't say that it's set in stone, because we can always change our neurons and we can always change our pathways. And that's why reading through time is good, but it's just harder. Like your brain is such a sponge when you're little, and it's a lot harder to do as you get older. So I love that you said that, because I'm a huge advocate of reading to your kids and having your kids read. And I think that's an interesting thought, that they may know a lot of this vocabulary from reading from when they were 6 until when they take the PSAT. And then you don't necessarily have to do flashcards, because I definitely remember doing vocab flashcards hardcore for like the 6 months prior to the SAT. Even like on the way to the test, I feel like we were doing flashcards. And I don't even know if that helped or if that was kind of too late.
Here's the thing. The vocab, by the way, now it is so much easier than what we had. So they would never ask like fastidious on the current version of the SAT. Instead, it would be like advocate.
Oh, wow. Okay.
That's like the hard word. So
so as long as you are a good reader, you're going to totally get the vocab.
Yeah, you'll totally get the vocab. But even if you don't get the vocab, again, where it is it's just like, if you didn't even know what advocate means, there are still ways where it's just like, okay, they're going to give you 4 answer choices. You got to look at the context clues in the sentence. And even if you knew 3 out of the 4, you could still do process of elimination, choose the one that you don't know, and it could still be right because the other 3 don't work.
Okay. Got it. You can still suss it out.
Yep.
That's good. Can you talk about what's the difference between taking a class for SAT prep versus like an online class versus a private tutor? And what do you think are the pros and cons of all of those?
Great question. So I don't know necessarily about online versus in-person class, but what I do know, I always make the analogy of this. It's kind of like if you were in a class with other people, your teacher has about, let's say, a 500-foot view of what's going on with you. If you have a tutor, the tutor has like a 5-inch view of what's going on with you. So what that means is that when it's one other person and they're there at the table or on virtually with you going over, you can go into the little micro moments of, okay, we have a vocabulary question. What is the strategy for that? right? And then I always have like, I'll teach the strategy and then I'll have my students do it just to kind of break it in. And it's sort of like, if they were to get it right or if they were to get it wrong, then we just kind of do a deep dive on why that was. Okay, what did you use? What set you off to the right answer? What didn't? In a classroom environment, it would be sort of like, well, the teacher has about maybe 25 to 30 other people. They can't get into the micro movements of why you did X, Y, Z. You have to just be smart enough to just be like, oh, I didn't get it, but you're not going to get that one-on-one attention. What I will say is that one-on-one attention is like rocket fuel for boosting your performance on it. It's like working with a personal trainer as opposed to being in a gym class.
Mm-hmm. I mean, do you think then in the classroom setting, is it more of those quote tricks? It's more like, if you can't figure it out, skip it. Like, you're better off to skip it than spend too much time. I mean, those sorts of things?
It depends on the teacher, because it's not totally apples to apples. Every teacher in a class and every tutor is going to do it on a different way. It just depends. But what I would say is that it's just a matter of how much attention are you personally going to get? And do you need that? I'm an only child, so I need a lot of attention. And what about the pace of it? Because in a classroom environment, the teacher has to keep going to accommodate everybody else. In a one-on-one environment, it's more likely they're going to be set to your pace. So I think I would like to say that the content is going to be the same. It just is a matter of, are you in an environment where you're set up to get it better?
So perhaps if you're really stretching and need a lot of improvement, probably the tutor is the better way to go.
Yes, absolutely.
If you're just trying to add 100 points or 50 points or something, you could probably do with the class.
Yeah, it depends. It really depends on the student. It depends on how much time we have, right? And because it's sort of like, it also depends on the budget. But it's what I found is that when you are working with a tutor, you can go really deep. And it's sort of like tutors can show you the blind spots that you have that maybe a classroom teacher can't. Not saying not all teachers can't, but it's sort of like, the teacher doesn't have the time to really go deep in, and that's what a tutor can do. They can identify blind spots.
What's the most points you think you've helped a kid improve?
Oh, that was on the ACT. I think his English and reading score, it was in like the 20 or 21. And I think we got him up to like a 33. That was really amazing. It was in a short.
What's it out of on the ACT?
36.
Wow.
Yeah.
So that is impressive.
Yeah. I could not believe that he leaped in bounds over 10 points. That is like, I was so happy for him. I'll never forget that, working with that kid. But a lot of it was really going deep into the grammar, which I always preface the grammar section of, let me guess, you learned grammar in 5th or 6th grade and you've already forgotten it. Uh-huh.
Right.
Okay. Let's go really deep into that. What's an independent clause? What's a dependent clause? But he just really needed a refresher on that.
Is there anything on the test, I guess, like, does it still do like prefixes and suffixes and stuff such that it would be valuable to know Latin? Or is that more on like the MCAT or?
That would be more, that's more medical terminology. Yeah, prefixes and suffixes, not, I know exactly what you're talking about, but no.
So nobody needs to be going crazy and being like, my 6th grader needs to take Latin.
No, not at all. No, I mean, the vocab on this, there's only going to be there's potentially only 8 questions for vocab. And again, we're talking about like words like ambivalence, which I know has a Latin root ambi, advocate, but it's not like, I don't know. It's not what we had to go through.
Let's say you had a 12-year-old. What do you think your strategy would be starting today and going forward?
I would pay attention to their English grades and their standardized tests. Are they reading at or above grade level? I would, on the math side, I would see if we could get them up to Algebra 1 by like 8th grade, so that geometry comes around there in 9th grade. And I would make sure that that they're keeping pace in terms of that. I mean, maybe I would do like a PSAT 9 or 10. It depends on the kid too. And it depends on where you want to go. Like if I was Ivy League bound, or if I thought that they were, I would be a step ahead to make sure that, you know, we are getting to where he or she needs to be to get that 1,500 and above, right? But for a lot of other schools, you don't need a 1,500. You need just like a 1,300. So it's kind of like, okay, if he or she is keeping pace with the coursework and, you know, maybe the PSAT 10 or what have you, you know, just kind of like, okay, just sort of like, it's just a thermometer. It's just, we're taking your temperature. We're just seeing how we're doing. And just kind of seeing like this. So it's not a shock, and it's not we're running out of time to get this done. I think that if the kid leaves their junior year with the score that they want for this, potentially the school that they want, it's going to make senior year a lot easier. Because in senior year, if you want to do early decision, you have all of your ducks in the row. You just have to be writing those essays, refining your college list, asking teachers for the recommendation, and of course, keeping up with the senior year course load and extracurriculars. So it's kind of like you just have to be aware that it's coming down the pike. And, you know, just make sure that they are being challenged, and that they are keeping up and keeping pace. And also, you know, bring it up with the teachers or even other parents about like, what is the nature of the grade inflation in that school? I think it's doing a gigantic disservice to the students where it's like, if everybody gets an A, then nobody gets an A.
Yeah.
And I don't mean to be hardcore, but again, if they're not being challenged, then it's sort of like they're going to get to college or they're going to get to a later point in their life and they're not going to know what to do.
Yeah.
You know,
Which
I don't want
absolutely that will really impact their college career if they were a big fish in a little pond and everybody was not doing as well as they thought they were doing, and then you get dropped into this college where, guess what, you're not as good as you thought and you can't swim anymore.
Right. And I don't want that to happen to people. I really don't. I mean, you should always be challenging yourself and making sure that, you know, and it's also just beyond just the grades. It's just like, I mean, I just think about the reading and the English part. Like, are you engaged with reading and with the outside world? Because there's such a huge world out there and nobody gets to experience it all. But books can really, you know, they can take you to new worlds.
Absolutely. Well, what I thought was really interesting is when I just went online and basically just Googled like SAT prep, it said, you know, what is a good SAT score? I think that was on the actual like SAT site. And the answer was one that helps you get admitted to a college that you want to go to. So like you're saying, not everybody's SAT score needs to be 1,600. You got to figure out your goals. You got to figure out what school you're going to. You got to figure out, are you going to a community college? Are you going to a trade school? Are you going to Harvard? And sort of tailor your prep to that.
Right.
And be realistic about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing is there is nothing wrong with going to trade school. There is nothing wrong in going to community. No, like seriously, if college is not the path for you, there's no reason to get into all of that debt or waste all of that time. I think one of the biggest lies that our culture tells us is that college is the end all be all. Not necessarily. It's how much value you can add to the marketplace. That is, if we're talking about financial, right? That's what it is. It's, are you solving a problem at scale, right? It's not that Mark Zuckerberg and Jeff Bezos went to Harvard and Princeton. It's just that, they created something that serves billions of people.
Right. And most of those people dropped out of Harvard.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, they were very smart people, but they didn't even get a degree. They, like you said, they went and solved a problem. They created an invention. They started a company, and you don't have to have an Ivy League diploma to do those things.
No, you don't.
Especially in this world is changing so fast, and AI is going to change everything, which makes me say, where are we going with this? A lot of schools are not even requiring the SAT anymore. Where do you think we're headed with all this?
Where we're heading is, I think, yes, a lot of schools are test optional. The UC schools are test blind. If you take an exam, they're not even going to look at it. But here's the thing. Let's talk about test optional. For some of the schools, it's actually not optional. They've done studies where it's they've looked at people who have been admitted, right? And actually 70% of an incoming class took the exam and submitted the score. So it's sort of it almost is, we don't know how many people applied and did not, but there seems to be a bias for people who take the exam and submit the score.
So they say it's optional, but they may or may not be admitting you if you didn't take it.
Yeah, exactly. But then also think about it from the college point of view. So you have maybe a school where there's a 10% admittance rate, right? That's like Boston University now. That's 10% now. In our day, it was probably 20%. But it's so let's say, I don't know what, I'm not up on, I forget what BU's, what their policy is right now. But it's kind of let's say it's test optional. You have 10 kids who are applying for one spot, right? And maybe half of those kids took this, the SAT, and they have a decent qualifying score. The other half didn't. If your ultimate choice was getting it down to 1 out of those 10, who would you look at more favorably?
Right. It's just another piece of information for you.
It's another data point. And again, it depends on how competitive the school is. If it is a 10% admittance rate, I don't think that that's a test optional. I think that if we're down to maybe 2 people for one spot, one took the test, one didn't, and they have the exact same grades, what do you think? They're going to reward the people who do the work.
Right. Because it's not easy to take the test, and it's certainly not easy to prep for the test.
Right. Schools know this. They know that in your junior and senior year, we're talking about competitive or highly competitive schools. You're taking APs, you're doing leadership, you are, you're trying to have a life, and then you have to budget in these exams, right?
Yeah.
Who are they going to, Also, I think another thing is that I think that what happened with the pandemic of, the really elites being it's test optional, and then all of a sudden it explodes with applications, and then they let in people who can't do the work. So that's another thing that they were just kind of, it strengthens the case of the SAT and the ACT.
And you don't think the tests are going anywhere? You think they'll stick around?
Not for the next 10 to 15 years. For the next 10 to 15 years, because I think that it's going to change. I think equity has a huge thing about like, well, also, I mean, they've adapted because colleges know that this is an arms race now. And they need to have something to kind of separate people, right? They do need to have like a quality test, right? But they don't want to have it where it's just like they're so like somebody who has no resources can't compete.
Right. Because, I see it in two different ways. Like, is there any way that the SAT is a way to find a diamond in the rough? Like, you're a kid in an inner city school, you haven't had all these opportunities, but you're really smart. And so, pow, you did really well on the SAT and it found a diamond in the rough and now you can go to a great school. Or is it just, okay, did you prep? Did you not? If you didn't prep, sorry, you're not going to do well.
Yes, it is a way. Because it's just like if you have somebody from a severely under-resourced school and they get a score where it is, like 15 or 1600, right? That catches the eye, of an admissions officers, because the admissions officers, they know these schools.
Mm-hmm.
And it's sort of like, if the kid's rocking straight A's, it shows that this person has overcome. That he is naturally bright, he or she, that they do have the grit, everything like that. I mean, it can really create, a standout like this. We need to watch this person. This person's going somewhere.
That's an interesting way to look at it, because I think a lot of people feel like it's a gatekeeper, and, sounds like it can kind of go both ways.
Yes, and it's also a really great data point for potentially getting scholarships.
That's a good point.
So it's not like, and there are scholarships out there, but again, before an organization wants to give you money, they're just like, is this person worth their salt? Have they done the work? SAT scores, I've also heard, even at test optional or even at test blind colleges, they can help you get into an honors college. So there are additional benefits than just kind of straight up admission. But yeah, I would say that the long and the short of it is that, these scores aren't the end all be all of a kid's, academic future. I think that a lot of the mania that contributed to Varsity Blues and, the manias that is still contributing to it, I think one just has to just sort of step back and just be like, some of it is just really artificial and it's also self-perpetuating. So it's just sort of like if we have like a nervous group of moms or something like that, then it's just like, then that's going to create a ripple effect of fear and everything like that. And, that's how something like that blew up, because these people were acting out of fear. And I think what it is if you kind of just step back and take a common sense approach to it, and you just are incredibly attuned to what your child needs and how they're growing and developing year over year, right? So it's just like if they have an incredibly strong bent towards math and science, even in their 8th or 9th grade year, like pay attention to that. If they like that, it's probably going to influence, that's something that could be influencing their college decisions. Do they want to be aiming for a college where there is a very strong math and science or STEM program, or are they undecided? And if they're undecided, that is okay. Gap years are fine before you plunge all of that money into something. And that's just what's so screwy about the whole system, is that we're asking 18-year-olds to make major life choices when they haven't had major life experiences.
Yeah.
Like, okay, choose a direction. Now you're going to plunk all this. I mean, it's very weird.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's just stepping back, realizing that a lot of the fear is artificial. And
I would remind parents to please let this be your child's decision. Just because you want to be able to say that your child goes to Princeton and have that sticker on the back of your window that says Princeton Mom does not mean that your child is necessarily wanting or ready or capable to go to Princeton. I think that was a lot of the Varsity Blues, is they just wanted to be able to say that their kid was going to USC. And, some of those kids, the woman that was on Full House, I saw like a TikTok or something with her daughter, because once her daughter got into USC, she was very much like a influencer online, and she would just do these videos where she would show herself getting dressed and getting ready for the day and going to parties and whatever. And she even talked on those video blogs about like, oh yeah, I don't even really like school. College is lame, whatever. Like, her parents got her into a place that she didn't even want to be.
right,
And, some of these kids, they don't want to be there. They'd rather be a video influencer, or they'd rather be a chef, or they'd rather be in culinary school, or they'd rather be taking a gap year and traveling to Thailand or whatever. And it's not, it's just, I think everybody needs to remember, like, what does your kid actually want to do? Do they want to go to a big school and really check out a lot of different things and a lot of different courses? Or do they really, are they totally into fashion design and they should go to the Fashion Institute and they shouldn't be going to Yale? Or are they really into, whatever it is? Maybe the state school is the exact right fit for them, and it's going to be miserable for them if they are not up to the standards of whatever school that you push them to get into, and then they can't keep up and they're just so miserable, and they'd really have more fun, do better, learn better at a different place.
right, exactly. It should be this very intentional, internal, thing where it's just like, what is the kid, what is their natural bent? Where do they feel that, is the best possible thing for them? Like Anthony Bourdain, I know he went to Vassar and then he dropped out and he went to the Culinary Institute, which is in Poughkeepsie. And look what happened to him. Like,
Yeah.
he had it ended tragically, but it's just like he revolutionized the culinary world.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And he was a dude in a very interesting time to go into culinary. Like, the guys weren't doing that,
Mm-hmm.
in the 70s or 80s. And it's just like, when you think about great people, right, you just got to look at their biography and just be like, well, what did they have and how did they get through? And, what did they make of what they had, like their internal resourcefulness, right? Because I think that resourcefulness is a really underrated quality, to be emotionally resourceful, to be intellectually resourceful. And I think all too often, people are sacrificing good old-fashioned resourcefulness and that internal compass for like the Harvard or Yale, and like flashing it at a cocktail party as though it's like Chanel, right? And it's not, kids are miserable at Harvard and Yale all the time. It happens where it's just like they did everything right, and now they're in this, super competitive environment. And it's sort of like, there's kids who drop out, there's kids who get depression, there's kids who have anxiety. And it's sort of like, I remember when I was touring, I did the college tour with both my mom and my dad. And I remember I toured Harvard with my dad. I'm like, I don't like this at all. This sucks. And he was like, okay, let's not do it. Okay. I never regretted it. I was just like, this is not for me. This is not for me. And I did go to a pressure cooker high school where like the most popular people went to Harvard, right? But I was like, this sucks. I don't want to do it.
Well, I'm really glad that you brought up that these tests can also be really helpful in getting scholarships, because again, It is incredibly expensive, and you may have debt that follows you for decades. And so, if you're not in that Ivy League echelon and you want to go to San Diego State or you want to go to Colorado State or something, and you need some scholarships, and you're thinking, oh, I don't need to take the SAT because I'm not trying to get into Harvard. Well, maybe you should take it because it'll help you with scholarships,
Yeah.
It's just another door to have open, another thing on your resume to open some doors for you. And so, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. But
Totally separate from this. I want to ask all my guests at the very end a question that I think really pertains to screening less and playing more, because I think these days, kids need a lot more freedom. They need a lot more just time to be themselves, and they need more responsibility. And that, I think, is, sort of what's lacking a lot in these last couple of decades. The kids are being really overprotected. And so I am wondering, what is the first time or one of the very early times that you remember as a kid doing something completely by yourself, either going somewhere or doing something and you weren't with your parents and you were just independent? And what was it? And do you remember how it made you feel?
Yeah, I was very much a go-getter as a young kid. If I had an idea, I just did it, right? And so, every kid has a suburban, it's like a rite of passage, have the lemonade stand, right? I was like, I saw that on TV, or it was like the cool thing to do. I was like, I'm going to do it, but mine's going to be door to door. And so, I had my mom buy lemonade, and I just I went out with her glasses in a tray, and I just knocked on doors. I'm like, do you want lemonade?
That's amazing.
Sure. 10 cents. Okay, here you go. Drink it.
I love this. How old do you think you were?
7 or 8.
And did your mom trail you, or she just kind of let you do it?
No, she let me go.
That's amazing. Yeah,
my mom, so she was a Danish immigrant, and she was I loved my mom. She passed 9 years ago, and every year I just appreciate her every year more, because she was like this Viking goddess. In retrospect, a lot of the stuff in modern American parenting just would not fly with her. So case in point, what she did was, the first place we lived was in Fort Lee, New Jersey, which is right on the opposite side of the George Washington Bridge. And we were on the 25th floor. So that was that's where I came home to from the hospital. And even as a little kid, we were on the 25th floor, and it would be winter. And I was a baby. And so she put me in a little thing, and she wrapped me up, and she put me out on the balcony in freezing degree weather.
Very Danish.
Yeah, it was a Viking cure to make sure that I never got cold. And I never got a cold, and I barely ever get a cold, And so,
do it.
Yeah, but she was very much, she was a disciplinarian. It was just that very Northern European, thing, yeah, even my relatives actually thought that she was tame in comparison to, how they raised their kids. They thought that she had me on such a loose,
because she was in America and they were back in Europe.
Yes, exactly. And it's sort of what I'm noticing is there's a lot of permissive parenting, where I think that the kids the parents are so afraid of traumatizing their kids that it's sort of well, I need to just check with Becky and her schedule, or I need to see if she's going to be okay with this. And it's sort of Becky's failing.
Mm-hmm.
What do we need?
Running the show instead of the parent.
Yeah, it's sort of and I get that. I'm not a parent myself. I don't mean to be judging, but it's sort of that's not how my mom would have done it. Do you know what I mean?
She let you do that. She didn't try to hold your hand and say no and say that those are strangers. Don't talk to them. I mean, they're your neighbors.
Yeah.
And I mean, were you in an apartment or a house?
By that time, we were in a condo complex.
Okay, so you were just knocking on the doors of all the other condo residents?
Yeah. I'd be like, hi, I'm Charlotte. I have lemonade. Do you want some?
I love it. And like, how do you remember it made you feel?
Fun. It was so great. It was so great. I was entrepreneurial even as a kid. And it was just like, I thought about like, oh, I want to, I got an idea about like turning my bedroom into a boutique where it would be like, I had all of these like tissues and I made little flowers and people would come I had this idea where people would come into my room and they'd buy these flowers, like of these tissues, and then they'd undo it. And inside there would be like a little prize. And it's sort of like, my parents are like, yeah, sure, go for it. And when it came to college and majors, my dad, when I was just like, what do I major in? And he was just like, major in whatever expands your mind the most. He wasn't a hippie at all. He had never done LSD. It's a very hippie response. But it's sort of like he was very much about intellectual curiosity. Do you know what I mean? Like learning for learning's sake, not learning to make a buck, having a genuine curiosity about the world and how it works. He didn't care about the SAT. Neither did my parents. They didn't really care about grades. They were just like, are you learning something?
Yeah. My dad's famous quote that he would always say is, you don't know what you don't know. And he was so into learning for learning's sake. And when I was in my undergrad, he just really supported just take whatever sounds good. And so I was a history major, but I took all sorts of other crazy stuff. Like, well, not crazy, but it's like I took art history, I took accounting, I took economics, I took architecture, just things that sounded interesting that didn't really have anything to do with my major and didn't count towards my major, but they just sounded fun. And that really helped me learn what I did and didn't like. It eventually led me to realizing that I loved film, I loved writing. And just, he was very into like, just take whatever sounds like fun.
Yeah.
And that's also something to think about when people are deciding on colleges. If I were at like strictly a film school or strictly an engineering school, I couldn't have done that. But at UCLA, you've got all sorts of choices. And so you have to decide, is your kid somebody who's going to want to just taste a little bit of everything, and maybe a larger school is better for them, maybe a liberal arts school is better for them? Or are they the type of kid that just is so into one thing, and maybe that specialized school is good for them? But
exactly. It just all depends. And the thing is that even if let's say, you had a kid who went to MIT and he did all that he was supposed to. And then he graduated, and by 25, he hated his job. He hated his life. I'm just saying, worst case scenario, you can always make a pivot.
Mm-hmm.
You can always make a pivot. And it's just a place just to start from, and as one of the professors at film school told us, nothing is wasted. I know that we live in this world where it feels like, oh my gosh, we're all in this race and we just got to keep on going and going, and you can't waste time and you can't waste time. But the thing is that even if something doesn't work out the way that you thought it would, right? There's still a lot of lessons that you can learn from that, just about how life works, about how you work, about everything. Just to kind of, reorient. And again, it's just, yeah, you can find a way if life takes that pivot. And we're living in an age where it feels like the pivots are coming at just whiplash speeds, right? So it's just kind of like, okay, the world that you and I went to school for doesn't exist anymore.
Right.
It doesn't mean that
podcasting didn't exist. I mean, this computer that's in front of me didn't exist.
Right. But the thing is that it doesn't mean that we're old, useless, and obsolete. I refuse to believe that, because we have so much more of our lives ahead of us. We have so much more to contribute. That I think that for me, it's just like, I love to learn. And if I do something and if I don't get my intended result, well, I learned something. And so I'm going to use that for the next thing. Absolutely. And I'm just going to keep on going. And I'm not going to let this world say that, well, you failed, blah, 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 I guess you can't do anything. No, that's not true.
Right. You've got a lot of experience to draw from, which helps you pivot.
Yeah, exactly. And that's just how I just love to just live my life and just be super grateful just every day and just stay in that kind of beautiful state. because the rest are just all, as much as I can, as much as the news right now is just so awful, but as much as I just try to just be super grateful that, you know, I have the love of my life. I have a passion for, it's so weird that I have a passion for helping kids with the SAT, but for me, I'm a very goal-oriented person. And so it's like, I love to work with someone. It's like, we got your before score. Now let's move towards this. And let's, like, I'm very tactical like that. Like, here we go. And I love cheering them on, you know? And I guess maybe that comes from my dad, because my dad and I used to have marathon tutoring sessions before, like, my final exams. And he used to just be able to help me in every subject because he was so flippin' smart. And that were some of the happiest times of my childhood, of just being out on the porch with him for like 6 hours at a time. And then he'd wake up like at 6 o'clock in the morning of like a geometry test for me. And we would just be sitting at the, you know, the kitchen table. Like, those were really happy memories for me.
I think that's a wonderful place to end. And thank you so much for all of this great info. I think it's really, really going to help a lot of people on their...
Yeah. And if anyone wants to get in touch with me, feel free to just drop an email to chwinters01@gmail.com. I'm more than happy to respond and to help.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to Screen Less, Play More, the podcast. A special thanks to Neil Penninger, who composed our theme music. Please join us at screenlessplaymore.com for ideas on how to get your kids outside, away from screens, and enjoying independent play. We also have book reviews, screen-free toy and gift ideas, and so much more.